We're live. Hi, Renee. Welcome to Venture with Grace today.
Hello, good morning, everyone.
Good
Glad to be
morning.
here.
Oh, yeah. So today it's like actually the first time I'm doing an actual physical live session. So I hope you all like it. So why don't we start with, Renee, why don't we start with like your background? So you have worked in the startup space since like 10 years ago, and then now you're a partner at 500 Global, leading the Mexico office. And why don't we talk about like, what were some core lessons that you've learned early on in your career that kind of shape you into like a partner
Of
at 500
course.
Global.
Sure.
Okay,
Thanks
awesome.
for the invite. I'm glad to be here. So, I am René. I'm a partner at 500 Global. And as Grace mentioned, I actually got started quite a while ago. My story, I always share that my story is that I'm a VC by accident. 11 years ago, and maybe actually a little bit earlier than that. But 11 years ago, I started 500 with Santiago, one of my partners that you just
Oh
got
yeah.
to meet. But previous to that, I was an entrepreneur myself. I was very young, whatever you can call entrepreneurship for me at that time.
Mhm.
But I was studying software engineering. I was working half my time. At night I was trying to be an entrepreneur, but
Mhm.
also over the weekends we were promoting entrepreneurship in my city. I grew up in Merida, which is pretty close to Cancun.
Mhm.
And and what ended up happening, and it's pretty easy to look back and see it that way. At the time it wasn't like that. We ended up building what we wanted to have as entrepreneurs, that we were promoting over the
Mhm.
weekend, something that we
Wow.
were very excited about.
Mhm.
But then on Monday everyone had to go back
To
to
a normal
to
job.
yeah, to
Yeah.
reality. That was
Mhm.
our reality. And somehow, what we were missing, it was connecting capital and
Mhm.
connecting that dot with the entrepreneurs and capital. And somehow, by accident, I ended up doing venture capital. And that was because Santiago invited me on a Wednesday afternoon. He called me. He
Mhm.
was living in Mexico City. He was doing something very similar, but at that point he was already investing in companies, and in 7 companies in Mexico.
Mhm.
So he called me and he told me, look, I was doing Mexican VC, which was the fund that he got started. And at that time, he was starting to be part of 500 Global.
Mhm.
And he told me, I need hands. Why don't you come?
Mhm.
And I asked him, how much are you going to pay me? And he told me, I have no idea. We don't have budget.
Mhm.
And then I asked him if what was going to be my role, and he told me, I don't know. I only know that we need more people to help us. So I ended up moving that same Sunday to a Mexico City that I was pretty excited about,
Mhm.
because I knew that I was going to face something much bigger than what I had in my city. Just to make a comparison, Mexico City is a 20 million people city.
Mhm.
My city where I grew up, it's 1 million.
Mhm.
So it's
So it's like a lot bigger
it's a lot
region. Yeah.
bigger, and of course the opportunity was going to be
Mhm.
that big as well.
Mhm.
So as an enthusiast that I am, I ended up just jumping into the idea of building
Mhm.
with Santiago, and and I felt that what could go wrong, whatever could go wrong,
Mhm.
I was going back 6 months after that to my city and do what I was already doing. And it only took me 1 week
Mhm.
to realize that I was never going back.
Mhm. I wonder, okay, so when you moved to the bigger city at that point, I'm sure like 500 Global wasn't as like well known as it is today. Also, like, from my experience working in abroad, like, the venture capital ecosystem in a different country or different city is very different than the US. Like
Yeah.
maybe some like really famous US brand, but like in a different city or different country, it's like kind of unknown. How do you quickly grow 500 Global into like establish the brand and thought partnership, like thought leadership in your own city and
Okay.
area.
So 500 actually got started here
Hmm.
in Silicon
Hmm.
Valley, and that was in 2010.
Hmm.
We joined 500 in 2013. So yes, there was already this brand,
Hmm.
the beginning of the brand that we are today, recognized somehow,
Mm.
but not really outside
Yeah,
as
yeah,
it is today. The
yeah.
idea of building something global, it was from the very beginning, but it wasn't like that.
Mm-hmm.
But I was 23 years old, Santiago was 25, and having a brand from Silicon Valley that was
Mm-hmm.
vouching for us to
Mm-hmm.
do
Yeah, yeah,
this in our region,
yeah.
it was definitely something that we were taking advantage on in
Mm-hmm.
order to kick off what we got started at the end of the
For
day.
sure, yeah.
And we were the first office outside of the US
Mm-hmm.
in order to, the way I see it and the way I describe it today is that we were an experiment.
Mm-hmm.
500 was experimenting, and we ended up being that first office and
Mm-hmm.
first team outside of the US in order
Mm-hmm.
to prove that with a regional team we were
Mm-hmm.
able to fundraise from that region
Mm-hmm.
and also invest in great companies.
Mm-hmm.
So at the end of the day, that was the challenge that we were taking on, and we ended up doing that. And up to today, we have invested in over 300 companies in
Mm-hmm.
Latin America as
Mm-hmm.
500. But not only that, the actual growth that we had as a global organization came from that.
Mm-hmm.
Today, we have small teams,
Mm-hmm.
not that small, but teams around the world that are replicating that.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how we ended up as a global organization investing in over 80 countries around the world.
Mm. I wonder, I really like that you basically like took something that's maybe just starting as a brand, like leveraging the credibility of the US brand to kind of like build on your own in the local area. And I wonder when it comes to like thinking about like, building a startup community and also investing. I have like maybe multiple, maybe there's like multiple questions in one question, which is one of them is like, how do you think about portfolio construction, the quality deals, and like maybe we start from there. So because I feel like 500 Global is famous for making a lot of quote unquote smaller bets on
Yes.
like a lot of different companies. Let's say if you invest in like, I'm just doing the math on my head. If let's say you have like, if you're investing 50 seed company, each company you invest in like 100K, and then how do you decide on um like the portfolio, because I feel like you have to have maybe like three big exits, call it like IPO or something to cover the entire fund, or
Yes.
based on the power law, there's some company, let's call it like 1/3 of the company will be 1x, 1/3 of the company will just lose money, and then 1/3 of the company having some different level of
Yes.
success. Um, how, from your experience, like how does it look like in real life in practice in Mexico City in the startup ecosystem
Sure.
there? And what's your thought process on capturing the um the company that will make up the whole fund?
Well, it's what you're describing. Our
Mhm,
strategy, since we're investing in the very, very early stage of a company,
mhm,
like most of the times I would describe a team that where I'm investing as a team of two or three
mhm,
and not much traction.
mhm,
Maybe idea stage sometimes, depending
mhm,
on previous experience, but
mhm,
maybe sometimes within idea stage. So portfolio construction for us, it's diversification,
mhm,
it's key,
mhm,
and the numbers will work pretty similar to what you're describing.
mhm,
So let's go back and
mhm,
talk a little bit of the three funds that we have
mhm,
fully invested. The first one and the second one, in average, we did a little over 70 investments.
mhm,
The third one, we did 109 investments.
mhm. Wow.
Many people will describe this as a spray and pray.
Yeah, yeah.
I don't describe it this way because there's a huge process behind
Mhm,
each one of these investments.
mhm,
So I wouldn't describe our process as a
mhm,
spray and pray. There's a lot of conviction building in each of the deals that we are doing,
mhm,
and there's a lot of thought process
mhm,
behind it. Every time we are investing in a company, we believe that that company is going to be the clear winner
mhm,
out of that 109,
mhm,
because we know that many of them will fail
mhm,
within the next years. But
mhm,
every time you're building conviction in a company, the day that you're putting that check in,
mhm,
you believe that that's going to be the unicorn, even though you know that probability is against that company. Okay, so out of those portfolios, if we look into that data, around 50% of the companies will fail, 100% failure. Then the other 50% actually comes from 10% of the whole portfolio. That's our business. So in a portfolio of 70 companies, we will end up with 5 to 7 companies that will make up for the whole fund.
Oh, wow.
And
Okay.
then the rest, you have this other 40% that I will divide it in two different parts. One that are those companies that will never create return for us, but they won't die. Somehow they do have a little business behind that it's enough for salaries, and maybe it's going to be
Like
a lifestyle
surviving.
business.
Yeah.
It's a lifestyle business, probably not much of surviving, because those that are surviving someday will end up as closing the company, because it's not worth being 10 years just surviving.
Yeah.
This is a lifestyle business. And the other category, it's a company that has grown a little bit more than a lifestyle business. It has some kind of value that it's enough for someone to come and acquire these companies. But those are not going to be very relevant within returns for us. My business is finding that 10%. So last fund I mentioned, we did 109 investments. And through the years, now we know that in Latin America, for the stage that we are investing, we believe that the diversification that we need within portfolio construction, it starts at 50 investments. So we don't have to do 100. We want to do 60. And then focus on that 10% within the next 10 years to end up with 5 or 6 clear winners that will come back as an answer for liquidity and interesting returns for the investors.
For sure. I wonder, what's your thought process on like saving for follow-on investment, and maybe potentially like, doubling down on your winners, and then thinking about the exit strategy? Because I feel like that's another, most people talk about they invest in a company, but they don't think about like the exit strategy. Of course, like if it's IPO, that's amazing. Or sometimes when it get acquired, it may not actually return the, call it like 100x or like 10x or like even 5x the return. Sometimes just bare minimum, like, you were valued at 30 million, but you were sold for 15 million. So what's your thought process on like follow on and exit?
So the dynamics of Latin America are going to be very different in terms of how the market works if you compare with Silicon Valley. Like nothing is like Silicon Valley, right?
The valuation is too high, or
valuation wise, liquidation wise, the number of companies in the US going for an IPO than in Latin America. Like all of these dynamics are going to be very different in Latin America. So follow-on investing. We did not have a follow-on strategy for Fund 1 and Fund 2. That's 2013 and 2016. And mainly because we didn't have a fund size that was enough to either do you do the diversification strategy, or you do concentration strategy with follow-ons, because we didn't have the fund size that where you could do both. Today we can. Starting in Fund 3, we ended up having a small strategy within what we do with follow-on strategy, and that's how we will keep going into the next years. So we
Also,
reserve 20 to 30% of the fund for that.
For sure. Sorry that I'm stopping you.
No worries.
So I wonder, when it comes to like picking which company to follow on, obviously like your there's like a lot of like metrics like the MLR or some sort of like, growth rate in different sectors. But do you have like a specific benchmark that you're using to like thinking about like the full-on
Okay.
investing?
So we can do a follow-on
Mhm.
within months of the first check,
Mhm.
or a year and 12 to 18 months after the first investment. Within our practice, we will always have this category for the companies that is the top performing companies.
Mm.
If you're a company that we already have you as a top performing company, it's pretty easy for us to do a small process where the decision making on a follow-on,
Mm.
it's either we propose that to the company
Mm.
because it's a company that we're close and we understand that the opportunity, if we put in the opportunity right now, it's going to be at a better price than
Mhm.
whenever they are
Mhm.
raising around, or there's a top performing company that is already raising around and we
Mm.
can consider coming in or not.
Mm.
What makes you have the category of
Mm.
a top performing company? Sometimes our metrics, most of the times, are going to be metrics within MRR, and
Mhm.
specifically how much growth are we were able to see within the past 3 to 4 months.
So it's like I would say like 10, like 15 to 20%, like like good MRR for. I mean, I feel like it's maybe SaaS and like consumer are very
Sometimes
different.
it's less than that for
Yeah,
us. I wish it was like that, but
of course.
then if it's that, it's a pretty obvious bet,
Right.
and we want to find
Mm-hmm.
the follow-on opportunity beforehand,
Mm.
because the entry point for us is very important within the multiple that we get in the future.
Mm-hmm.
So the better price we get is much better for us, and
Mm-hmm.
that's why we start with a strategy where we have the first investment and standard offer.
Mm.
We do $300,000 for
Mm-hmm.
10% of your company in Latin America,
Mm-hmm.
but that comes from 2013. We were
Mm-hmm.
doing $37,000
Mm-hmm.
for 10% of a
Mm.
company. That's
Yeah.
11 years ago.
Yeah. I was listening to a podcast like on like LatAm where they were talking about like at the beginning of like 10 years ago, it was like the whole investment goes into it are like something crazy like I maybe I'm wrong, but like it was 80 million, but now it's not 80 million, like maybe basically in the millions, but like nowadays it's like in the billions. Like at the maybe 3 years ago it was like 8 billion, and then 2 years ago it was like a 1 billion. At least like
Yes.
it was like in the billions.
But it's crazy, those numbers, if you compare those numbers to 2013 when
Mhm.
we were getting started. First of all, probably we were not able to put in two hands the number of
Mhm.
investors in Latin America,
Mm.
venture capital investors. Then the actual um, rounds happening. Today we celebrate on a weekly
Mhm.
basis Series A rounds
Mhm.
in between 5 million, 7 million, eight
Mhm.
million dollars. Back then,
Mhm.
we were celebrating a seed round of $300,000
Mhm.
every 6 months or
Mhm.
something like that.
Yeah. The frequency is a lot lower.
In the numbers as well. Today,
Yeah.
we're talking about higher numbers.
Mm. When you're thinking about like the exit strategy, since like we talk about like when to follow on, so basically maybe like there is some sort of clear indication of like the winner's motion, like you were talking
Yeah.
about like thinking about like people talking about them a lot in the ecosystem or like potentially attracting follow investors.
So
But yeah.
for us, the way that we invest,
Mm-hmm.
it's that we, as mentioned, today we're investing $300,000,
Mm-hmm.
and comparing to what we were doing last year, which was $80,000.
Mm-hmm.
$80,000 back then will buy you, as an early stage company, something in between 4 to 6 months of
Mm-hmm.
runway in Latin America. Today, with $300,000 investing in the same team, it's going to be something in between 12 to 18 months. So one of the reasons that we went to update this offer is because we want to push the question of how much capital we want to bring in and when to the
Mm-hmm.
future, and actually sit down with the teams to help them build the company.
Mm-hmm.
And so, since we are working with that company very closely for 6 or 12 months, that's when we create that very close relationship, and that gives you a lot of data points for that decision.
Mm,
So we know everything about the company in
mm,
a way that we have lived the challenges with them.
mhm,
So we know how they take decisions. We
mm,
know how they hire new team members.
mhm,
We know about the culture. We know about, we celebrated together wins, and we also were together for the challenging moments.
mm,
So I think we were able to build a way of working with
mhm.
companies that gives us a lot of different data points for our decision making within the follow-on investing, that is not only looking into what's the MRR, or of course we look into that data, but we have much more than that.
Totally. When a company, so I guess like how do you kind of build a relationship with the founder to keep on track of things? So, some of them, like I've heard of, like, some of the fund managers would just invite the startups to work in their office. So, like, obviously you can like find out about the information that way, and maybe some create like boot camp program or like some sort of like CEO sessions. What's your way to engage with like when you call like 109 founders, and let's say like let's call it like, imagine if statistically like most of, I would say like half of the company die in the first two
Yes.
years or so, like from like just a general statistic wise. I wonder, how do you kind of prioritize on the winners, or like how do you support like when they are losing, like do you back their second company, or like also how does your kind of like, I wouldn't call it CRM, but like tracker kind of look
Okay.
like to actually track what's going on, since that's like basically 109 investment, that's kind of like every other day you have to
Yes.
think about making an
I
investment.
love I love the
So,
question
yeah,
because the actual number is not 109,
yeah, yeah,
because we come from different funds.
yeah,
So the total number is over 300
yeah,
companies.
yeah.
And then you have to think on
You,
those
you need
active
to you
companies.
need 200 more to call it 500 startup.
And then,
It's insane.
but we do have 2,800
Yeah,
companies within the whole portfolio.
yeah.
And the challenge, that's the real challenge.
Hmm.
So we will leave at 500, and this
Mm,
is something that we've been pushing this year as my team, as the Latin American team,
mm,
that we cannot be relevant as an investor in the early stage only with capital.
mm,
And it comes from that challenge.
mm,
So of course we have to give services to the portfolio, but we also want to be the first call that they do whenever
mm,
there is a challenge, and
mhm,
we want them to feel confident that we are the right partner for that.
mhm,
So we believe that we can be relevant within capital, but also creating products. So
mhm,
we in Spanish we call it the four C's,
mhm,
and it works in English as well. So
mhm,
it's capital,
mhm,
code, community,
mm,
and content.
mm,
So within the vertical of code, we've been developing a lot of different internal tools
mm,
that will help us to give much better services to the portfolio
mm,
in volume, so we
mhm,
can attend one to many.
mm,
But we also have tools that let's think of deal flow.
mm,
There's 3,000 companies that applied to 500 in Latin America last year.
mm,
How can you process that? And then at the same time, you're serving your founders, and how?
mhm,
So internal tools are very relevant for us, and building tools that help us do our job better are very important for us.
mm,
The second one, it's community. So the internal community somehow will solve some of the issues
mhm,
or challenges that companies will bring to you,
mhm,
but you create a community that can help others.
mm,
So there's the we've been building a lot of different things. So there's many to many.
mm,
From a WhatsApp group,
mhm,
we ended up trying Slack, but
mhm,
honestly, WhatsApp is king in Latin America, so we
mhm,
had to go back to WhatsApp.
mhm,
And there's a group that is very active on a daily basis of
mhm,
people either asking for help
mhm,
or sharing challenges on a
mhm,
personal level. and people is talking, and so community is very important for us. And we do also on-site events.
Mhm.
So on a monthly basis we have a lot of different things happening
Mhm.
where founders can meet, our investors are part of it, our mentors and our team.
Mm.
And then content, because we think that if we create content for everyone, not
Mm.
only for the 500 community, we can inspire others to start either investing
Mm.
or building companies.
Mm.
And by being top of mind, hopefully they want to partner with us.
Mm.
And then internally, if there's something that we've been helping a company that that topic was
Mhm.
helpful for 20 of them, let's just create a content that helps 100.
Mm.
So that's how we think around that.
Mm. I wonder, so like when you're thinking about, I really like you mentioned like 4Cs, and let's I want to start with like you mentioned about like coding or like building internal tools. Right now there's a lot of tools that's like AI
Yeah.
driven, and how do you kind of leverage AI into building tools? And in terms of tools, like what would you think was the most beneficial, since I'm sure there were a lot of sourcing tools out there. Like I've
Yes.
heard of like, Signify or like other company that are built, not other funds that are building like a lot of data driven sourcing model, like a sourcing function or like hiring function. What's 500 startups like unique, like I guess like
Superpower.
superpower to like actually leveraging tools to like accelerate either you pick or
Yes.
you source or
Actually, I believe that our superpower within that topic
mhm,
is sitting outside.
mhm,
It's Santiago, my partner.
mhm,
So Santiago has been developing for his entire life.
mm,
He got started with building tools and putting tools outside on the internet when he was 13 years old.
mm,
So even when his job description
mhm,
it's a managing partner at 500,
mm,
what he really loves doing is building products.
mhm,
That's his hobby, and he measures that daily. He's coding every single day. Over the weekend, the guy takes vacations to
mhm.
build products. That's how he
Mhm.
that's how he take vacations. I
Yeah.
usually do something different. So he has been working with AI and
Mhm,
stuff like that for many years.
mhm,
So that's a superpower that we take advantage internally, but we also take that as an advantage of how we evaluate companies.
mm,
Because then when you are talking with a founder that is building product,
mhm,
then you have a different approach of someone that is actually building product that same day using the same tools.
mhm,
So let me give you a few examples on how we do this. In Santiago leads
mhm,
product for the global organization.
mhm,
So that's why I said that he's sitting outside and he's the
mhm,
superpower. One example is when you have 2,800 companies,
mhm,
they gotta do reporting for 500.
mm,
All of those emails that we
mhm,
get with product, we can take all that information and automate the way that we update our internal tools
mm,
of the information that we get from our companies.
mm,
That's a very simple example,
mhm,
but when you have 2,800 companies,
mhm,
it's relevant.
mm,
Then we have what we call our lab of AI.
mhm,
In Latin America, we have this website that is called descubre.vc. Descubre is a place that you can go and find out of all the news regarding venture capital and
mm,
entrepreneurship in Spanish in Latin America.
mm,
And this is a tool that is fully automated.
mhm,
So let's say Forbes is covering the new round of your company,
mhm,
and they announced today, it's a press release, that your company recently raised a Series A round of $7
mhm,
million. dollars.
mhm,
We're scraping the web every second of the day.
mhm,
We find those news. We send that new news to OpenAI. We get an approval from that
mhm,
interaction of if it's news from entrepreneurship or VC,
mm,
and then we send it back to get
mhm,
a summary of whatever they wrote,
mhm,
and we get all of the entities or persons involved.
Mm.
So then we publish that with a summary, small title. We consolidate. If it was published in 12 different media partners, we consolidate in just one URL, and you can get all the links, the summary, and then we built a profile of the company and also the VC funds involved. And
Mm.
all of that is fully automated, where you can go today and find all of the profiles of relevant companies or small companies in Latin America. We have it in Descubre.
Mm.
And I share this with you because it is relevant for us to build that kind of tools
Mm.
that gives us visibility as investors
Mm.
for decision making. It's
Mm.
pretty easy for us today to find competitors or whatever within a category, but also gives us the glimpse of building with AI. As mentioned, when we are evaluating a company,
Mm.
we can actually talk technical.
Mm. How do you? I wonder. Like, I really like what you said about like some a news a summarizing tool as well as like a tool that kind of like um like basically extract all the important information from like portfolio updates so you can keep an eye on it. um I wonder, do you build these things from scratch or do you use like Zapier or like existing kind of tools to like put it together?
We do both. Sometimes um, we build from scratch,
Hmm.
but also you gotta be resourceful.
Mm.
So we take advantage on whatever it's out there to make our
Mm-hmm.
life easier.
Totally. So I wonder when it comes to um activating the community in the ecosystem. So for example, um like interacting with like follow on investors or like people in the later stage, and as well as like finding founder from like the best sources. I think like here's my observation in the different community from like previously being I was originally from China, so like I worked in venture in China, so I feel like a lot of it were there were like system or like financial advisor companies that they kind of serving as a um, like diligence
Yep.
layer. But in the US, like obviously everything is so transparent. You can find out like who did what on LinkedIn or like just by having Crunchbase and then like everything else. I wonder what is it like in Mexico? Is like the top founder coming from like the top
Mm,
universities, or are they coming from like the top tech company in Mexico? Or like how do you kind of like source the best talent, or if there's any kind of benchmark that you would use to evaluate them from
that's
the
a good
beginning?
question, and I believe that it's a controversial one
Mm.
because it might depend on who you ask.
Mm.
What's going to be the answer? At 500, I think, and I'm going to speak for what we do in Latin
Mm.
America and how we source that kind of deal flow. I think the way that we think and the
Mm.
way that we take decisions, it's also based on who we are in
Mm.
our context.
Mm.
So we don't come from the greatest schools. We don't
Mm.
come from uh, Stanford or Harvard as as MBAs. We don't have that.
Mm.
None of my team members have that.
Mm.
We come from building ourselves
Mm.
and from going out there and work. That's
Mhm.
it. So I believe that that's how we think of the talent that we
Mhm.
are evaluating.
Mm.
We don't measure by where you study or who you are or what's your last name, which is sometimes very relevant in Latin America.
Mm.
And maybe others will do that.
Mm.
There you will find people that want to find the thesis on where my talent comes from.
Mhm.
In maybe that's relevant, right?
Mm.
For us, it's how you can prove that you are able to do whatever you say that you want to do.
Mm.
So the level of execution
Mm.
that you bring in, it's going to influence directly in our decision making instead of where you come from.
Mm.
And because most of the people in Latin America won't have a story of where they come from.
Mhm.
So you gotta look closely, and
Mm.
you gotta find out people that through their talent.
Mm.
And today it has changed.
Mm.
If we go back to 2013, maybe most of that people did not had the opportunity of even working in a startup previously, because we
Mm.
did not have startups back then.
Mm.
Today is very interesting because
Mm.
now we have that.
Mm.
So many of the entrepreneurs that I'm investing today, they have relevant previous experience within building companies.
Mm.
So I would say that describes much more of where that talent comes from. So they either spend some time in another startup that today is well known,
Mm.
or they are building their second,
Mhm.
third, fourth
Mhm.
company. Most of them maybe
Mm.
companies where they failed, but they learned a
Mm.
lot. But now we also have those founders that have a previous exit and
Mm.
they're building again.
Mm.
I love those cases, but we don't have many yet.
Mm. I wonder, so like, do people have like the same level of conviction to the similar group of founders? So I'm gonna give you an example since you mentioned about like where people come from, like where they work or like what they have built. Let's say like I feel like in Silicon Valley, the most popular thing would be like, oh, is this person leave OpenAI to start their own startup? So do we have the equivalent in like the LATAM area,
Yeah.
or is this like gonna be the popular founder? Let's say they left like new bank, then they start something, and then that's
Yes.
like kind of the people that they're chasing after.
A little bit.
Okay.
Because, for example, there's Rappi, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. The
And
Rappi Mafia. I've
yes.
heard.
Yes, and
Yeah.
actually today they like to call this instead of Rappi Mafia, because
Mhm.
mafia is not a word that is going to have a good connotation in Latin America.
Yeah, yeah.
So they say Rappi Magia, like
Oh, okay.
magic. They are trying to push this different word. So today you have companies like that
Mm,
have built something big,
mm,
but also they had huge teams.
mm,
So today, what does actually mean to be an ex Rappi?
mm,
So I believe that in the example that you're giving about OpenAI,
mhm,
probably you can make that same question,
mhm,
like how much time you spent there, what what kind of project within that company
mhm,
you were involved of, how much of that responsibility was yours instead of just getting the tagline of
mm,
X whatever. So for me that's very relevant, because now we have a lot of founders
mhm,
that have that ex Nubank, ex
mhm,
Kavak, ex Rappi.
mhm,
So for me it's super interesting to see that talent,
mm,
but I, I tend to go much deeper on what was the relevant experience, because
mhm,
otherwise there are many of them outside.
mm. Interesting. I like what you said about like it's kind of similar, but also like, there's a lot of like nuance to it too. I want to maybe like dive into like the investing trends in the LATAM area. So obviously I feel fintech was like one of the biggest like
Still.
sector. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay. So what would you say like are like why do you think fintech was like the driven kind of
Huh?
um like area first, and like what are the other kind of different sector look like?
Okay, so if you ask
Hmm.
around in the US,
Hmm.
you can ask anyone,
Mm.
and the probability of them having a bank account is going to be
Hmm.
very high.
Mm.
In the US, in Mexico or Latin America,
Hmm.
that that's not that's not the case.
Mm.
So just starting with that example,
Hmm.
and then you can think of, so if they don't have a bank account,
Hmm.
then they don't have a credit card.
Hmm.
If they don't have a credit card, probably they don't have insurance either,
Right,
right?
yeah, yeah.
So in Latin America, that's what is actually happening,
Mm.
that most of the population
Hmm.
don't have access to what is mainstream
Banks.
here,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
right?
Yeah. So it's kind of similar to like China. So like people skip like a certain stage of like instead of banking, they have like WeChat, which is like Technically, I feel like it's a
And we don't
really
have that.
super fintech app.
There's people that it's saving money, cash,
in
their bed, literally.
Yeah, I think that's understandable.
So it also comes from building trust with either your government or the financial institutions. There's people that they don't trust either of them. So yeah, and then there's let's say that you end up opening a bank account, then you don't understand taxes. And since you're afraid of that, it's better to keep all cash instead of regulate that money, so there's these cultural challenges of building trust and access and many things that brings a huge opportunity for our region. So since that's the case for many Latin Americans, where they don't still today 2024 they don't have a bank account, they don't have insurance, they don't have all of these mainstream services that you have in the US, that describes the opportunity. So fintech is pretty obvious.
But why would people not trust like a bank, but like they trust like an internet company?
Oh, I'm not saying that that's the solution, but sometimes it is, because with an internet company it's much easier to either understand the product that you're buying or simply the access. Like Nubank, it's crazy growth because it's so easy to open up an account with them. It's within your phone, 2 seconds you have an account. In the past, up to today, you cannot show up at HSBC through the app to open an account. You gotta show up to the branch. So it comes from making it easier and accessible than the building trust part of it. It helps. Health, also very different. In Latin America, no matter which country you go to, it's either Mexico, Colombia, or Peru, access to health within the public system is broken. Let's say you get diagnosed with whatever disease, but you don't have option but the public health service. In Mexico, you will show up and maybe your appointment is going to be in 3 months. And maybe your disease is a life-threatening situation. And that's how it works. Nothing can change that, and no one will help you. And then if you think of the private service, it's not accessible because it's very expensive. So it's easy to understand that issue. Now we have startups trying to build that in order to make it more accessible, and either way, easy for everyone.
I wonder, so like you mentioning about like two big trends like fintech and as well as like healthcare, and what would you say would be like the third like bigger trends that where people are investing or like building in?
Okay, there's one, I would say two. There's one that also goes to the B2B, B2C customers, where it's education. Same example as fintech and health. It's exactly the same challenge if you compare public and private education, right? But the other one, it's on the B2B side. There's a huge opportunity on building for the companies. And there are many startups today building on that side where B2B SaaS is very relevant. And you can see a lot of different categories within that, from helping a company being more efficient and transparent with finances, internal finances, such as accounting and stuff like that, to HR tech. So I think that category today is very relevant and very interesting for many founders and investors.
Like operational kind of companies.
Yeah.
When it comes to like looking at these different companies, is there a lot of innovation happening, or is more of like a localization? Because I feel like a lot of the internet company, no matter which country you're in, it's a lot of like borrowing idea from like different region, but like localizing it into something more applicable for the local people and local ecosystem. So what's your thought on like, let's say someone trying to build um the bricks for LATAM or
Yes,
like
there's a lot of that.
yeah.
And there are many startups that will come to
Mhm.
pitch to us saying, I am the X for X,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
There's a lot of that. The truth behind that is that it's very challenging because we're very different cultures. So if you copy paste something, the probability of that not working is going to be very high. So there's a lot of things that you have to build in order to bring a copycat within our region. You have to understand our region. So let's say a company that gives loans, since the culture and the dynamics of the financial
Like climate.
climate
Yeah.
of a country like the US, it's going to be much different on how people thinks of their ability of pay back that loan in Latin America. So maybe you bring that model to Mexico, that's something that works in the US, and your payment rate to your loans is very healthy, and within the same framework that you use to evaluate your customer in the US, you put it in practice in Mexico, and then you will get a very high churn within your clients, because the Mexican or the Colombian, they don't think, the ability of payment is different, everything is going to be different, and you will fail by doing that. So there are many copycats, but I wouldn't take any credit out of doing that, because it requires a lot to make it work.
For sure. Is there any particular companies in the fintech realm that you find interesting in the earlier stage? Obviously, there's like the new bank of the world that's like doing very well in that space. But like, what are some kind of like newer companies that you find like really interesting? Maybe around like the 500 portfolio, or like company that you have seen?
Okay, companies doing within the category of developer tools,
Sure.
I want to see that. I have a company within our portfolio that is called Dapta. And this is a company that helps to automate everything. And it's a very simple way to connect every API that you know with drag and drop within Dapta. So you can build a lot of different things with Dapta. And this is a team of 8 or 10 people sitting in Colombia, selling worldwide. Sounds pretty simple, because the usual mindset where a company within that category is born in Silicon Valley, that's a regular mindset. We sell US first and maybe worldwide. In Latin America, it's pretty common to find teams that are building local solutions, because we have so many problems outside of your door that the easiest way to start is solving a problem that is just sitting in front of you. And maybe that's not going to be worldwide, because it's very specific to Mexico or very specific to Colombia. And even though we all speak Spanish, just because of the regulatory issues, it's not as simple as just, if I'm doing this for Colombia, it's going to be simple to do it for Mexico. It doesn't work that way. So today in Latin America, for me, and most because of the actual technology of today, hugely because of AI, I think that we can build those companies that sell worldwide, stay small. We really want to invest in those companies that are sitting in Latin America, because it's much cheaper to be building from Latin America than from here. Same talent, or better talent sometimes, in keeping the team small. I want to see those companies that are able to provide value to their clients worldwide,
Oh, sorry.
spending in pesos, charging in dollars, and staying at a minimum of 10, 20 employees, selling 50 to 100 million a year.
Mm. I really like what you said about like basically leveraging AI. Everything is a lot cheaper and faster, and you can technically have a unicorn coming out of like a lower cost of living area
Mhm.
to like sell it to sell it to globally. And I wonder when it comes to like the go to market motion, like should they be building for the local first and then expand into the US, or would you say they should be just start selling, like having like two people on the sales team living in Silicon
I
Valley?
would say case by case,
Mhm,
honestly. It depends on your product and what you are solving.
mhm,
If you're solving something that is very
mhm,
local,
mhm,
I would say that today the the actual path of a company in Latin America, if it got started outside of Mexico, it's decide either you go for the Mexican market or the Brazilian market.
mhm,
But most of the times it's going to be much easier since it's already challenging. Go to Mexico.
mhm,
There's two reasons for that.
mhm,
We speak Spanish,
mhm,
and the second one is that we are close to the US. In case that the next step is the US,
mhm,
you got closer.
mhm,
And in that path, it's the most common one to see because most of the companies today are approaching our local opportunities.
mhm,
There are few that have the example that I just described.
mhm,
And those are going to either have someone in the team moving to the US
mhm,
because it requires to understand these dynamics as well, or they will be selling from a small town in Colombia.
mhm. I wonder, you mentioned about like a dev tool or like infrastructure, like
Yes.
basically dev tooling space. Um, can no code people just use it to like drag and drop and like, or it's just like for developer only?
It's actually not for developers.
Mm,
So my point of view of no code,
mhm,
I want to see those tools used by people that are not
mhm,
developers. So I am not a developer today.
mhm,
Give me extra abilities for me to build solutions for my day to day.
mhm,
Data can help you with that.
mhm,
Let's say for this episode,
mhm,
you take the transcript
mhm,
and you build a workflow
mhm,
where you just put a your transcript within a Dropbox or
mhm,
Drive folder, and then
mhm,
automates a lot of different things for you in order
mhm,
for create pieces for social media,
mhm,
the description for your YouTube episode or
mhm,
wherever. And instead of doing that manually, you can create a workflow with data.
mhm,
So today or tomorrow
mhm,
that you do this for every episode,
mhm,
just that task got easier
mhm,
and faster
mhm,
for someone that is not a developer, right?
mhm,
It's like I'll drag and drop, create my
mhm,
workflow, and then it's fully automated.
mhm,
For the teams that I'm evaluating, building using no code,
mhm,
that's for me a turn off.
mhm,
I don't. I believe that the time where we were investing in companies that got started with an MVP with no code tools, I don't think I want to do those investments anymore
mhm,
because today you're competing with the best of the best,
mhm,
especially with AI. So if there is a team out there starting to build something from scratch and leveraging AI, your chances of competing with that starting with no code are minimum.
mhm,
You're not in the best horse in the race.
mhm,
That's how I think.
mhm,
So I love no code to solve problems of people like us.
mhm,
But as a company,
mhm.
building a company with no code, that's what is not interesting for me today.
Mm. I wonder, how do you evaluate the technical moat of these different companies? And in terms of like the go-to-market motions, so I feel like since, for example, I guess you mentioned about like this dev tooling company, are they? what does a sales motion kind of like look like for them? Is that just like, in Silicon Valley, the equivalent would be, let's say you try to onboard to a lot of startups, eventually like try to get like a feel bigger logo on the table, like, but everyone's in Silicon Valley.
Yes.
So how do you see from also like from the technical mode perspective? I feel like in Silicon Valley, there's a lot of people building something requires a lot of capital, or like there's a capital mode, which is, a lot of people can raise very fast with a lot of money. And then the other part would be, you're sitting on like Stanford and Berkeley's like research labs and within the corner. What's your evaluation for the technical mode for like dev tooling, as well as the go-to-market motion for them?
Sometimes we don't have, because of the stage that we're doing, sometimes we don't have that. So I mentioned that we can do either from idea stage to some kind of traction, and early stage, it's wide. It's pretty difficult to just describe one scenario where that fits for early stage. So it's so wide that for us, if we are doing more on the side of the idea stage, I gotta see a team that has built something in the past. So my criteria is going to be highly influenced by what you did in the past, and it's basically another company or the success stories. If you don't have that many don't have that, then show me product. Let me use the product. Let me see some kind of traction. And one other relevant thing is making these questions and trying to find out how they think about it. But I'm not trying to find the correct answer for those questions. I'm trying to find how they think. And because tomorrow that's going to change. I already know that. We invest that early that sometimes it's irrelevant. And what it's going to be, it's going to sound like the most regular answer, and we invest in teams. And so all of my process is based on who are you, what you want to do, how you think, what have you built in the past. And if we don't have that, the past, because sometimes you invest in people that is very young, how can I validate the person? And we think about that process in a very similar way of recruiting someone for your team. Is this someone that you want to work for the next 10 years with or not?
Awesome. Yeah, well, I totally agree with you. A lot of like the early stage data kind of like doesn't work, as there's a lot of like changes could happen just like day by day. I want to end with like a quick 1-minute fire round for you.
Okay.
What's your favorite book?
Oh, Shoe Dog.
Oh yeah, I love Shoe Dog. So who made the biggest impact in your career?
My biggest impact in my career, Santiago Zavala.
Who would you invite to your dinner party?
Michael Jordan.
Oh wow, that's really fast. Where can we find you outside of work?
Well, what? Sorry?
Where can we find you outside of work?
Oh, either running. I'm a runner, and hopefully that stays for quite more time, or having a good whiskey with a friend.
Oh wow, that's two different, completely different things. I wanna at the end, why don't we plug your podcast, like for the people who are interested in learning more about it? Where can people find it? And then also, if people want to, like, what would be like your biggest lessons from doing so many podcasts yourself?
That is challenging.
Yeah.
We share that challenge.
Is this your first English podcast? Because I've like checked out so many different like Spanish ones.
Maybe I have one or two in English that someone interviewed me as well. I do remember one that is called Mentor Day that it was in English.
I think I checked out a lot of like Spanish ones, but yeah, And yeah, my
I have
Spanish
many.
is not
I
very
have
good.
many in
Yeah,
Spanish.
yeah,
Yeah, so I host a podcast as well
yeah.
that is called Ángeles de LatAm. It's in Spanish, and I interview active angel investors in our region. I've been doing this for almost 2 years, and I got started as a podcast that I wanted to do on a weekly basis, one
Mhm,
episode per week, releasing on Thursday. And then after 1 year, I got very, very tired of it. It is challenging on thinking who's next,
mhm,
having that ready, get ready for the interview,
mhm,
having the time for the interview, etc. And with the amount of work that we have, it got very challenging having an episode ready every Thursday.
mhm,
So by December, I was tired of it. Even though I was
mhm,
enjoying
mhm,
the process, I was very tired. So this year, I decided to start with 2 episodes per month, every 2 weeks, also on Thursday. And somehow I got my energy back.
mhm,
And recently, a month ago, I started again on a weekly basis. So one of the things that I've learned and why I'm sharing this is that you have to do this for you have to be very, very clear on what's the objective on doing this. Is it the audience? Is
mhm,
it something else? For me, it's meeting with new people. And if sometimes there's 1,000 people listening for it,
mhm,
or sometimes there's 150, I really don't care about looking closely into the metrics. I of course look into the metrics,
mhm.
but that's not my motivation.
Mm,
I have episodes with less than 200 uh, views,
mhm,
and I have episodes with over 3,000 views.
mm,
And that's for someone that probably has been doing podcasts for many, many years. Maybe even the 3,000 it's small numbers for them if they are hearing this. For me, that's huge. There's 3,000 people that
mhm,
listen to us. And so, but I don't do it for that. I do it in order to get to meet new people, which is whoever I'm interviewing.
mhm.
And now I have friends from that place. I have new investments
Mhm,
because they refer deal flow.
mm,
I have met many people in person, and now I'm living a very nice part of this, which I don't have to think that much on who's next. At the
mm,
beginning, there's a lot of work on that, but now people ask to be part of it,
mhm.
or I have very random people that I never met before
Mhm,
introducing me to people,
mm,
which is amazing.
mm,
And so that's my biggest learning. Just do it for yourself.
mm. Totally. I completely agree. I feel like it's always like good to build like deeper relationships than like the superficial ones. I feel like a podcast is definitely like a great way to emphasizing on like the strength of the relationship too. I want to quickly give the like Mac from the audience a shout out.
Oh
So he
yes.
was our audience, and then also he is a friend to both of us now to like introduce us. And if you are listening, like hi, also like if any other audience, if you're listening and you find the episode interesting, and then if you have any suggestions, please feel free to just DM me, and also reach out to Rene on LinkedIn. He's a top voice too, so check out his podcast. Awesome.
Thank you
Okay,
so much.
thank you so much. Okay, this was our first like successful live session. Okay, let's end stream. Okay, bye guys.